Born in 1940 in Illinois, Richard Pryor was one of, if not the greatest comedians of all time. He struck a chord and a nerve with America, forcing it to look at its social questions of race, sexuality, the class system, and the more tragicomic aspects of the human condition. His wit was uncompromising in his live performances, projecting a generosity of spirit that united people of all backgrounds. He changed the comedic landscape by breaking all the rules of what a stand-up should do, and could say by using his real life to inform the jokes, and particularly with his 1979 live in concert film, you could tell he was pulling out some really sad memories from his own life and was using them as the stepping stones to build great jokes and heal his own anxieties of self-doubt and lack of confidence. Richard Pryor's Live in Concert is, in my opinion, the best and most important comedy special that's ever been recorded and released. The film was recorded at the Terrence Theatre in Long Beach, California in 1978 and has a running time of approximately 79 minutes. It was Richard's first ever comedy special, having already been in the business for over 29 years, appearing as a comedian on TV and writing comedy shows. The special was decades ahead of its time and is what could be considered the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band of comedy shows. Many comedians have tried to emulate it, have copied it, and tried to reach its heights, but nobody ever has. There's only two comedians that I think have ever come close, and they are Dave Chappelle and Eddie Murphy. The great movie critic Pauline Kael had this to say about the film: probably the greatest of all recorded performance films. Pryor had characters and voices bursting out of him. Watching this mysteriously original physical comedian, you can't account for his gift, and everything he does seems to be for the first time. Richard does dead-on impersonations of the respective races, cussing, trying to act tough, how men and women piss, but it's his imagination that elevates him to a different level and hints at the comedic genius of the man. He gives his impressions of what animals think, from his own animals, a monkey and a Doberman, to police dogs, and it seems so exact, so precise, not to mention the fact that he's at his self-deprecating best. He also covers completely unrelated topics such as drugs, family life, boxing, and sex. It's very hard for me to relate and describe just how important this film was for bridging the racial divide in America in the 1970s. And especially as somebody not from America, I can only imagine how groundbreaking this was to say the things he said and perform them in front of a mixed audience at this point in time. This was the performance of his career and a testament to the power of comedy in distancing people from their prejudices and bringing people together at the same time. The opening of the film shows Richard arriving with his wife, and he's looking a little bit nervous and unfocused. He's got cameras pushed in his face, and he almost looks transparent, with his fear and self-consciousness swimming around the surface of his being. And then the next thing we see is on stage and right into it. I'm not sure what he did in preparation, but I can only guess, and that guess would be cocaine. On stage now, you can see he's ready. He begins doing some crowd work off the top of his head, just riffing on whatever he sees happening in the room. It's like we've known him for years, and he's that funny friend or relative that walks into the room and easily jokes around with everyone, easily, with careless abandon. He starts off straight into racial differences between white and black people, and how they act in different situations, particularly how white people act around black people. At that time, we start to see his ability for physical impersonations. And although this is not the strongest part of the film, this is just part of the warm-up. Here it's very clever in the way he cuts the tension and thanks Patti LaBelle for coming out and performing, although she's not shown in the film. This gives Richard a level of rapport with the audience that shows he's not being malicious with anything that he says, and this in turn gives him license to speak the truth, and that he will call out whatever he needs to in order to give the audience a good time. He then goes into a monologue about how Patti LaBelle sings and how the white saxophone player is completely different to the black saxophone player. He then does a 180 and begins to thank the audience for coming out, despite all of his indiscretions over the past year, which shows the audience that he's not adversarial to them, that he's a human full of mistakes, and that he can laugh at himself, which is endearing. He goes into a monologue about getting arrested by the police after shooting his own car, then about German Shepherd police dogs and how they catch white people and how black people can run away. This sounds like a cliche premise now, but the way Richard does it at the time and brings it to life is truly unique. He then talks about his own animals that he owns, including dogs and a pet monkey, and how they interact with him and vice versa. His impressions here are so real and abstract, almost like he's creating a Disney movie, which at the time was completely different to anybody else and what they were doing on stage. He's anthropomorphizing animals, giving them human characteristics to describe their animal behaviors, is very unique and not something that I've ever seen somebody else do so well. It's almost like he's in a meeting with Disney, explaining how to make the characters look on screen by his actions. Richard then segues into his experience of having a heart attack at 36, which is an extremely serious topic that he makes light of, turning a near-death experience into comedy. He details his experiences in hospital, giving urine samples, and being hooked up to a life support machine. He segues into the related topic of his father's death and how his father died, fucking a prostitute, and how the funeral came about and the difference between white and black people's reactions at funerals. He cleverly compares the reaction of black people at a funeral to being the same way that his grandmother reacted when she found out he was taking cocaine. This all proceeds into getting disciplined by his father, and then he brings it around full circle to the cemetery again, and it being super cold and trying to hurry up the procession and the family gathering after the funeral, which is most certainly where Eddie Murphy got his drunken father monologue from. Not stolen, but definitely inspired. This all leads up to him and his father going hunting in the woods, which to me, I think is the best sequence and the pinnacle of the whole special, and possibly the best comedy sequence of all time. Richard brilliantly details a walk through the woods with his father, imitates how women go to the bathroom in the outdoors, and my favourite impression, when he imitates them coming across a deer drinking water. What really makes this special is the way that he gets into the impression by changing his tone of voice as if you're actually in the woods with him, speaking softly, putting the audience right there in the moment. His impression of the way white people and black people walk through the woods and encounter snakes is without a doubt one of his best impressions ever. It's so funny that I don't even laugh at it. I just shake my head with a dumb grin, thinking about how brilliant it is, and the tone with which he says snake, with the echo on the microphone in the concert hall, almost brings me to tears watching on in awe. The whole sequence really is masterful, and he shows that he's not just a guy who is funny with a few penciled down jokes and the confidence to get up on stage. Here is when you start to think, oh, this guy is actually spectacularly talented. There's nobody else really like him on the planet, especially at that time, that can do anything that he does. If you were to look at the concert represented on a graph, it would be shaped like a pyramid with a big spike in the middle. He slowly builds up, getting funnier and funnier, culminating with the walk in the woods sequence. Then he brings it back down the other side with segues into boxing by comparing how Leon Spinks would act in the woods, and recounts his own experience as a boxer and being in the ring with Muhammad Ali, who was actually in the audience that night at the theatre, which leads into fitness and how you need to stay in shape, self-defense, people's egos and fighting. Then he winds around to drowning in a swimming pool with kids watching you. He does a bit more crowd work to clear the palate and loosen a bit of tension before moving into the final sequences of the concert, which is him talking about Chinese and Mexican people ordering at a Chinese restaurant, a Chinese man with a stutter, white people having sex, and the difference between men and women's orgasms. It really doesn't matter what he says or does at this point in the final part of the concert, because the job's already done. This special is the template for every other special that's come after it, and is the reason why they are called specials, because this truly was and is something very special. This was a guy with all the problems in the world who put them aside for an hour and channeled all of that chaotic energy, fear, madness, anxiety, tension, addiction epigenetic racial memory, everything that he had went into this 1 hour, and fortunately for us was captured on film, which to this day is being studied and watched and enjoyed and marveled over, more so than any other comedy special that's ever been recorded.